I'll make this very brief. I wanted to thank everyone for coming to this last Public Safety Advisory Task Force meeting. And just a quick few thank yous I want to give out in the beginning so I can maybe make the closing a lot shorter. First of all, I just wanted to thank the 22 members of this task force for giving of your time and your energy and your passion. We really appreciate it. We once again know that everyone has jobs and families and a lot of other things going on, friends. And so, taking this much time to really work with the city of Tempe on this is really, really important to me. And I just really appreciate your willingness to spend this much time over a period of several months providing this input and feedback. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Wanted to thank my colleagues, Vice Mayor Randy Keating and Councilmember Lauren Kuby for also serving on this task force alongside me. Wanted to thank the members of the Tempe Police Department, Chief Jeff Glover, Assistant Chief Mike Cooley, Sergeant Rob Ferraro, and so many others that have joined during this process. The reality is they have been here for each and every meeting the entire way through, collaborating with the members of the task force and city staff on working with this. So I really just appreciate their time. They have a very challenging time right now working in continuing to provide a high level of public safety to our community. So I know their time is precious and appreciate them being here. And then just wanted to thank our staff, from Strategic Management and Diversity, Wydell and Jonay, and I'm saving my last thing here. I know a lot of you know about the announcement that went out very recently, but about Rosa Inchowski here, who's been leading this group, who was initially our Strategic Management and Diversity Director, who's been since promoted to be the Deputy City Manager for the City of Tempe. The first woman to ever be in the city manager's office in the city of Tempe's history. And I just wanted to thank her for all of her efforts and congratulate her on her promotion, exceptionally well-deserved and earned for all the hard work, the nearly 3 decades of work you've done on behalf of the city of Tempe. And with that, I will go ahead and stop, but I just wanted to thank each and every one of you for being here today and for making this such a huge success. It looks like I will turn this over now to item number 2 to our city manager, Andrew Ching.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all the task force members who are here this afternoon. Item 2, speaking about building a community safety strategic plan. This strategic plan doesn't exist. It doesn't happen without the efforts of this group. The Public Safety Advisory Task Force was the leading edge of our efforts in really kind of rethinking our approaches to community safety. And in just a couple minutes, I'll turn it over to Rosa to provide some of that detail as to what we mean when we talk about building a community safety plan. But, and the mayor's already alluded to it, part of what I think will, as we move forward from this day into the future, the foreseeable future, and even further down the road, as we talk about the task force recommendations and the process of making sure that we got that right and that we heard what you said collectively, moving to then working with all of the affected departments and staff in an effort to do some strategic planning, to assign responsibility for the execution on recommendations, to check back in with you, to show you what we've been doing since the last meeting, is all sort of culminating in the point of we're ready to start executing. And in order to execute on the recommendations as they have been, provided by this group, it became incredibly obvious and important that we needed someone to lead this effort, not just from the position of, it being one of many duties, but really with a hyper focus that I believe that this effort really needs. But not just a hyper focus, but someone who has the institutional knowledge, someone who understands the organization that is the city of Tempe, that has connections within all of the affected departments, including police, someone who has been part of this community for years and years, and who has worked hard to create relationships within the community with all of you. I'm sure that as this task force has moved forward throughout the last several months, and you've had questions about things, that invariably you would be calling or sending an email or a message to Rosa Inchowski to get those answers. And that's not by accident. if you want to have something done and done well, you make sure that that effort is staffed by people who understand exactly what needs to be done and has the wherewithal to make sure that it happens. So this elevation to deputy city manager is part of our demonstration as to the significance and the seriousness with which we take this effort. This is not something that we want to see, buried in someone's workflow. This is not something that we want to do for any sort of performative reasons, to say, well, we checked a box and we now have a task force that provided us recommendations and we matched it up with a strategic plan. That's not the way we do things in this organization. Not if we really want it to be taken seriously and to really take root and to be conscientious about our efforts in implementing these recommendations through the planning that we have done and will continue to do. So that's really the reason why. This is an opportunity to really provide someone who is of the highest caliber, Rosa, to work on something of the highest importance. And when you match those two things up, I think really good things can happen and will happen. And if you notice in our announcements about what we are doing and why with respect to this elevation to deputy city manager, she has two tasks. And number one is this, and number 1A, if you will, is learning from all of the things that we have gone through as an organization and really as a society in the time of the pandemic, pre, during, and post, and figuring that out. And it's not a secret as to why these two things really are top of mind, because in many ways they are related. Much of the focus that we have had, much more so on social justice, systemic racism, policing and the role of policing in our society, came about during the middle of this pandemic. And so these two huge societal issues grew up side by side together. And really, if you're going to do one right, you might as well do both right. And in order to do that, as I said earlier, you need to have the right type of leadership. So that's why we are where we are. And I know all of you here, if you haven't already, directly to Rosa, will wish her well and provide her all the support that she's will need and is going to need. I know she has the ability to avail herself of all the resources of this organization, as well as the resources that are provided by this community, and including all of you as task force members. So I'm going to go ahead, unless there are questions, and turn it over to Rosa at this time to elaborate more on the details of what we're doing here under item 2. But again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your support throughout this process. Thank you for your patience as we worked from the last meeting to today to really try to get things in a position, in a place where you understand it better, where you see where we're going, and in turn, we're going to then bring it to council next week to get their input and their direction as well. So, some pretty critical things are happening in the next week or so, and it starts right here with all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Mayor, for those very kind words. It's a heavy heart, right? It's just, I feel like the acknowledgement really is appreciated, but know that the honor has been mine to live and serve in the community that I love wholeheartedly. So with that, I'm going to get right into the job that we need to do tonight in order for us to get the wheels going. As Andrew kindly mentioned, I have been given the charge of 2 specific projects. And you have heard me say this past year, it has been a tremendous lift for our nation, our government, for all of us. It's been a year of disease and distrust. And we came together in October to build trust. And my commitment to you is to make sure I shepherd your recommendations and work with our city workforce and coming up and reporting back to you how we're doing on that plan. 2 things that I wanted to share is, you may not know this, but in 2002, and I equate this to mirroring much of what we've done in the city, we went through a major changes in 2002, and our city was transforming into making sure it was equitable and inclusive. It was a diversity office that was formed in 2002. We had an outside consultant that helped us, laid out some framework, but I went to work with our colleagues in our organization, our employee groups, our unions, our community, our commissions and boards. So when I sometimes get a little shocked about what is ahead, I always think past behavior, best predictor of future behavior. Our organization has always risen in times of adversity and challenges, and I am honored to be the person that helps shepherd that. So I will need all of you to support as we transform our community into modernizing what government should look like, and what policing, along with our chief. So I look to doing that with you. The second part of that, as Andrew has mentioned, is the COVID relief and making sure that we keep our community safe. We know what's going across in other countries regarding the variants. So with wastewater epidemiology and working with ASU and our business partners, that we are starting a campaign regarding vaccination. I know many of you, I've had conversations regarding different viewpoints on that, and I will look to you to help me understand that narrative and communicating all perspectives. Regarding the intersectionality, Raquel, I remember one of the first meetings you mentioned the importance of right to breathe and equity in action and the things that our office was already engaged with our community. So I wanted to honor, I remember that specifically because to me, strategic planning has been more than just creating a plan for the mayor and council. It has been about alignment of our workforce to boards and commissions, to our community, and making sure that nothing is left behind. So we created this quick chart just for those of you who may not be as involved as Raquel and others with some of the other programs that our office is creating or has created. We are looking at an ecosystem for the city of Tempe. It's really about community safety. And it's the responsibility of all of us. While we focus on public safety policing right now, please know that it involves the right to breathe. And we can talk about these programs at a later date if you want more information. Equity in action is about engaging our community in new creative ways that have not ever been involved with our government. Community reinvestment roundtable, honoring the grassroots organizations that want to give their input and ideas about how government should be structured to make sure they're included. The chief has already created a chief's advisory group, chief's employee group, to making sure that the employees are involved. We also have the Grand Canyon Institute, who is interested in looking at many of the things that you have all recommended, along with data. And then obviously the Public Safety Task Force is an important piece of all of that. Thank you, Wydell, for that slide. So as we move forward, most of the work will be in the next 30 minutes to look at the plan. I'm going to pause there to see if you have any questions regarding my role. At the end of the meeting, towards the end, before the mayor gives his closing remarks, we'll talk about next steps specifically. But Andrew and I just wanted to give you a high level, the position, the two tasks as far as that I am charged with. And more importantly, I'm not going to take for granted that you all know our org chart. I report to the city manager. So if there's any questions about anything, it basically goes directly to Andrew along with me. Any questions regarding any of that? Okay. Perfect. I guess everyone wants to get to the Suns game. So Wydell, I'm going to turn it over to Wydell, and we're going to go over some questions, outstanding questions. The internal implementation team, which I call it multi-departmental, has met. They have, what you've seen before you, have identified owners and timelines. What we have for you is some clarifying questions and making sure that we touch base as far as support for the document. Before we move to that, I need to pause and just say, the last 7 sessions, we have built relationships. We've had some very tough conversations. And Many of us have had even tough conversations after the meeting is over, and you all know who you are regarding some of the conversations that took place. All of that in my book has been healthy. It is building relationships. I always think probably the strongest relationships I have with people are those that perhaps I have disagreed with, and we have come to find common ground. So I ask of you, as I turn this over to Wydell, to think about that. The plan may not include everything that you may support. I want to make sure that we give space and grace, allowing people to voice their opinions. Your opinion matters, or else the mayor would have never asked you to be part of this. So make sure you share your perspectives. I also want to say, if there is kind of a gap in the understanding of what do we want to move forward, we have an option. And I want to remind you that last time we created a parking lot, not everything that everyone discussed made it to the plan that you see before you. We created a companion piece that would serve as clarifying documents for the implementation team, that we would revert to that for clarifying kind of spirit of the conversation, or perhaps some clarifiers. That is also an option. So we don't need to get into major disagreements about what stays on the plan and what doesn't. That is one more option for all of you. But know that I just ask all of you to honor the relationships that we have built. I always say no strategic plan or policy is worth ruining relationships. And the byproduct of all of this is really about building trust. That is really the reason the mayor brought you together. It wasn't the plan. I'm just kidding, Mayor. I'm just kidding. Don't have a heart attack, Mayor. But you all know what I mean, right? Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wydell, and we'll get going.
Hi, thank you, Rosa. And again, it's great to see everybody again. Hope you're having a better year than we had last year with the pandemic. But I wanted to take an opportunity for our departments. As Rosa mentioned, we have an interdepartmental team that will be working with subject matter experts as well as stakeholders like yourself. But we did have some clarifying questions as we started to really try to put some traction to some of the recommendations. So I'm going to facilitate just asking the questions. We have a lot of our staff are on the call today and on the virtual meeting, so that they can try to get mainly the spirit and any specifics that you want to offer in regards to the questions that we do have. Like Rosa said, we really want to get this right, but we also know that that's going to take a little bit of deeper diving into all of the wonderful elements that you helped put forward in your recommendations. So with that, I'm going to jump right into it. And the first question is in regards to exploring laws and accountability. One of the recommendations that came out of the task force was regarding the review of the union contracts. And we call that in our organization the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, and any enabling legislation. There was also elements of seeking ways to limit union political activism, as well as ensuring that renegotiation of the TOA contract does not protect, and I'm using the language that we used in the implementation, or not in the implementation, but in the recommendations, bad cops. But basically what we'd like to know is what parts of the MOU give the task force concern?
And if this meeting. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So feel free to either raise your hand or jump right in.
So I raised my hand.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Wydell.
Or who was that?
The interest is, am I talking out of turn?
That's okay. I saw Vianney raised her hand. You guys were almost simultaneously. So
it'll be Pam and then Viti.
yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The concern that I have about the MOU is that, at least from my standpoint as a former elected official, and because the MOU is negotiated between the union and the city manager, elected officials don't really know everything that's in the MOU. And so that was the reason I'm actually the one who submitted that because I think that there needs to be more transparency about exactly what is in the MOU, and is there anything in the MOU that needs reconsideration?
Okay.
Does
Thank
that
you.
help?
Yes. Was there anything else on enabling legislation, Pam, that you'd like to speak to?
In terms of enabling legislation, I know that there are some state laws and some federal laws that would require some political activism from probably the council members in cooperation with and in affiliation with councils across the county and state to help revise or reject.
Okay.
That's what I meant by enabling legislation. There is everything from the qualified immunity to the police officers' Bill of Rights and so forth that need exploration in terms of whether or not they're achieving our goals for a safer community.
Thank you, Pam. We'll move to Viri. And again, Viri, I apologize. Your hands came up almost simultaneously. So Viri, and then Keisha.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think what Pam mentioned is a big piece. There are cities throughout, and I'm not sure exactly how Tempe, so I think there's research to do to make a process that is more accessible to know what is happening prior to the week before there's a vote. So, you know, Austin, San Antonio, a few other cities, and we have a list and we can share that have more open processes that allow, you know, the meeting, like, the meetings to be viewed, the minutes to be viewed for when police are negotiating their contract. That's one. And then I think looking through the MOU, there could be, you know, there should be like an analysis, and there are some guides around how MOUs, certain clauses that it should not include that would allow more transparency and accountability. For example, in Phoenix, it was through the MOU that the Professional Standards Bureau became the only entity that could investigate use of force. So that wasn't like a state mandate, it wasn't in a city charter or law, but it was within the MOU that police were the only ones that could investigate themselves, and therefore not allowing for independent investigations. And so in this last contract with the police union in Phoenix, that clause was removed, and therefore now there could be a board that does independent investigations. And so I think that both looking at the process and how open and accessible it is, but also reviewing the MOU in alignment with, you know, we can share some of the clauses that we have seen. And there's also an organization that reviews MOUs and can say, hey, these are some of the conflicts, some of the ways that this limits transparency and accountability. So I think for us, it's the opening of all of that to allow to not do additional protections, and then also that allows transparency throughout the process were some of the main concerns.
Okay. Thank you, Viri. You offered to send documents. Feel free to send those to Rosa or to me, and we'll make sure they get to the entire committee as a resource and as a companion piece to implementation. Appreciate that. And then I'll move over to Keisha, please.
Hi. So, one, I just want to again repeat what Biddy and Pam had said about the importance of transparency. And because of the lack of transparency, the specifics are hard to say. But I do know one thing that's been across the board, across the country, is that in MOUs, there are clauses in there to protect officers after they commit a crime, after an officer involved shooting. And so things like they can wait 48 hours until after they shoot someone to speak to someone investigating whether misconduct has happened. as well as the ability to be able to be prepped by your lawyer or your boss to basically know what to say and not to say before you make the report on what happened with an officer-involved shootings. There's many clauses in MOUs like this that essentially protect officers after they have shot or killed someone. And so those are areas for concern that would need to be removed.
Okay, thank you, Keisha. And I'll move to Rob, followed by Roy.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I would just say, when we negotiate contracts, there's multiple parties involved, but I would also say that our MOU is completely accessible. I really encourage all of you to Google TOA MOU. It's the first result. It's a public PDF document, and there's nothing in there that is negotiated above and beyond what's already provided. And so I've said, from the very beginning of this, is that I'm not here to protect, when we negotiate contracts, here to protect bad cops. And so nothing is in our contract that is above and beyond what is already guaranteed by state law. If there is a discussion that there's wanting to change state law, that's a different conversation. But I would say, in addition to what was just mentioned in terms of additional protections, we just as when an officer is involved in an officer-involved shooting, they have the same rights, the constitutional rights that anyone else has. They have the right to speak to a criminal attorney. And so that right should be afforded just as it's afforded to any other, citizen of this country or resident of this country. And so we enjoy the same rights that everyone else does. And so I would encourage folks to look at our MOU and see if there's things that maybe they want changed or whatnot. And I'm always open to those conversations. So, well, that's really honestly it. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak. So thanks.
Thank you, Rob. And we will follow up. I've made a note to send the task force the MOU TOA link from tempe.gov. So thank you for that. And Roy.
Yes.
This will wrap up our exploring laws and accountability clarification item.
Okay. In reference to the MOU, is it possible to include things such as body camera conduct, meaning that there's a penalty if an officer misuses or turns off their body camera inappropriately? Is it possible to include the use of profanity or the banning of profanity? I believe it is important to address an officer's conduct when they are able to use profanity. I don't think any public servant should be able to use profanity on the job. And also, in the MOU, is it possible to also include that the city of Tempe would be willing to maintain disciplinary records of their police employees? I will stop there for right now. So my point is I know we are talking about, and Rob, thank you for giving us the link to the MOU. I plan to look at it, but I also believe that I do not believe that these items are included in the MOU.
Thank you, Roy. So we'll move to the next item that we seek clarification on, and this is in regards to establishing a family and victims bill of rights. And one of the items in the recommendations was to include a family liaison and an advocate to follow investigations. The clarifying question accompanies a statement as well as the victim services is a component of Tempe Human Services Care 7, and victim services is comprised of 6 victim advocates. The role of the services and the advocate is to liaison between victims and investigators to ensure victim rights are upheld. Tempe Human Services aligns this with what they believe is the recommendation here. And they were looking for confirmation that the victim services through Care 7 is correct in regards to the idea about the family liaison and advocate to follow investigations. So looking for clarification if that is what was the intention behind this piece of recommendation. And I'll go to the mayor, followed by Viri.
Great. Thank you, Wido. Just a question, actually, maybe for staff, maybe perhaps for Rosa or for Andrew. Curious, the council during the capital budget this year made the decision to elevate the Family Advocacy Center that was previously going to be unfunded for the current year to the funded category. And I know we're currently discussing partnerships to get that off the ground. And I think that a lot of what's contained potentially in that section would be handled not only by Care 7 currently, but would be even greater enhanced by the existence of that Family Advocacy Center that would serve all people living in the city of Tempe, victims of child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault. So I'm just curious if that does go to kind of answering some of that or possibly clarifying that question, or if I'm off. I just wanted to check my own assumptions.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think that it does. I think that having an advocacy center for families and victims is certainly part of what I understand the clarification to be about. Having a center assumes the existence of policies and practices that are protective of victims and families. So you wouldn't have a center that would have that as its basis without presuming that we would also build in something at a local level that would protect, families and victims. Back in the early 90s, the state of Arizona passed the Victims' Bill of Rights, and there's quite a number of protections for victims of crime built in there, mostly in a procedural sense in terms of notification, required notifications that have to be done by prosecutors. But that doesn't mean that it is exhaustive, and there's certainly work that could be done in that realm, whether it be at a state level, locally, or otherwise. So I think one necessarily follows the other, I believe, and it doesn't. And the fact that there's momentum around doing that, I think indicates that there's probably also a desire and an ability to move forward on discussing some of the other potential protections for victims.
Thank you, Andrew. We'll move to Viri, please.
Yeah, so that's something that we spoke a lot in our circles, and a few things. I think one, that there's nothing that really outlines the families and what they are going through, because nothing within state law or even locally, identify them as victims. The Victims' Bill of Rights, for example, doesn't apply to the families that have experienced police violence unless there is eventually the prosecution and a crime found and charges on the officer, which doesn't happen. So I think that what you shared was is correct. Like, what families are seeking is someone that can follow the investigation within the city and then communicate with them regularly. Right now, there is, all of the families we work with who've lost their sons, whether it's 4 years, 2 years, or last year. None of them can get a hold of the detectives, or if they do, they're not given information. They have gone, and CC'd like assistant, and this is like in Phoenix and other cities. They have CC'd the city manager, they have CC'd the mayor, they have CC'd a lot of people, and they still just can't get information. One of the big things for families is their loved ones' belongings. So what's supposed to happen is that after the investigation from the county, the case is is cleared, and then that is when families should have access to their loved ones' belongings. So we have families 4, 5, 6 years that haven't been able to access their loved ones' belongings because it's just so hard to navigate the city's bureaucracy in the police departments. So this person, this liaison, will ideally be the person that is, as much as a lot of times police get monthly updates, that they would be getting the same updates, right? Or that they can call in to know what is happening with the investigation, where is the investigation, and any of those processes. So that is correct. And I think if we do include it with CARE 7, just making sure that these families are named, again, because just the regular victims conversations don't name families and victims of police violence as victims unless there is eventually a trial and charges pressed. Otherwise, they're not seen as such. So just that language should be clear. And then we've been working with a handful of families to outline what were some of the rights that they and the experiences that they had. And so, you know, some of these families, and we'll share their stories and we can get this over to everyone as well. They're about to finish that draft of, you know, we wish we could have had someone in our language talk to us. We wish we could have had, you know, and just an outline, a series of things that didn't happen for them that hopefully can happen for other people.
Thank you, Vieri. And I see Councilmember Kubi's hand up. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, I'm thinking about on the case of Antonio Arce and how that might be instructive for us, because as I understand it, there was someone from CARE 7 that was assigned, but only for temporary duration. Perhaps Rob or Chief Glover could clarify how long that CARE 7 person served as a victim's advocate. But I mean, I know there were a number of issues during that time where if the victim's advocate wasn't there, it would have been so helpful, like when the family was, I think, required just to watch the footage of the killing at the police station. And it was, you know, back and forth about that, but that was very harmful to the family. So I'm wondering, you know, in the case of Antonio Arce, maybe we could be very specific and concrete here. We did have CARE 7, but did that CARE 7 advocate's job end after a week, or how long was that person assigned? And I believe that person was Spanish speaking as well.
Okay.
I can answer a little bit maybe. So yeah, so Maria, she was great, was, you know, assigned during that time. I think a few things that were a struggle was, one, getting that person there. So I think something that automatically, if something happens, can get assigned would be, you know, one of those things that happens with this being part of the scope of this role. So for like Maria, I think we called like Valle del Sol, we called, I think Lori Robinson at that time was with Tempe. We called a few people, and I think your office then helped get this person in the room. And then they were like a mental health support. So they, you know, Sandra, Antonio's mom, was hospitalized after watching the video, and you know, it was a really, you know, heavy moment. She was hospitalized, and then this person followed up with them. But it was on the mental health and like grief support. It wasn't, I think when we asked about questions around, because they wanted a copy of the video, they wanted a copy of the materials, they were kind of like, oh, we can't help with that. So I think that was, you know, an advocate would ideally be like, let me go find out, we'll figure out how to get you those materials. But, you know, when we had those conversations, and then they continued care with Valle del Sol more directly for a few weeks, and almost, I think, until they left the state.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, Vieri. One other item related to the Victims' Bill of Rights. I'm moving to another item of clarification. It starts with utilizing data and transparency to create the Bill of Rights. I think the intention of the question, and I know Judy is on the line here, is the task force looking for a Tempe specific Bill of Rights, or the dedication of additional resources or improvements to the Victims' Bill of Rights in the Arizona Constitution?
I can speak on our conversations in that space. This is something that, because this is something that would include victims or survivors of police violence, it would have to be separate, because that isn't currently the scope of the state's Victims' Bill of Rights. And so I think that there are, there's conversations with a few, cities around like what could that be within the city, and there is also conversation starting around what could that be at the state level. And I think going back to the original, I think that Pam shared around like what can we fight for to, in the future. I think that there is like a state version that can happen, but this right now how we're seeing it is that how the families have talked about is that departments have their own protocols and their own procedures, that some of it would be, so some things have to be tailored to that process, to what currently is already happening, to what roles already exist or don't exist. So like there's cities that don't have any kind of liaison position, some cities that do. Some cities, like Phoenix, that just established this Office of Transparency that could function in different ways, but Tempe has other bodies, right, that could serve as those mitigators. So I think it's something more, we're talking about something more tailored to the city and how the city processes function.
Okay, thank you, Viri, for that. And then a couple other items regarding advocates and family liaison roles. The first one is the victim services is comprised of 6 victim advocates, and it is to liaison between families and investigators. What I'm hearing is to have more specificity with that role, and the department wanted to see if that was confirmed in regards to, is that the direction, the intention that was meant through the recommendations? And then also combining this role, or at least making sure that there is the victim advocacy program is aligned with CARE 7 work and function. So I think that's the direction it's heading. Just wanted to see if we're off step a little bit with that.
I mean, yeah, other folks can add. I guess on my end, I think that some of the systems that Tempe already has in place could be expanded or changed to meet that. So I think that is what makes sense, rather than like start another, completely different like department or office or things. I think that there is space. I would, I guess, offer up on our end is creating space for whoever's holding that or leading that to meet with some of the families who have experienced police violence, to then talk about how that could happen. But I do think that what is in place could be just expanded to do this.
Thank you. Roy's hand is up, followed by Shireen.
Yes, I was very happy to hear this explanation because this is a heavy lift. This is a significant amount of work that we're talking about. And so I wanted to make sure that we're not depending on one person to do all of this work. So I'm happy to hear multiple people and multiple departments. I think this will be the way this should look and shape up to be an interdepartmental collaboration throughout the city. And so I'm hoping that the city is willing to dedicate the necessary resources that it will take to bring this into fruition. So I just wanted to say that, because this is going to be a lot. I mean, I'm impressed with the amount of progress that we've made since day one, but at the same time, I'm a little more concerned about the implementation of this, that it doesn't just land on one person's desk to say, hey, you figure this out,
Okay, great. Thank you, Roy. And I'll move over to Shireen.
Well, Roy took a lot of what I was going to say. My big concern also was it says there's a lot of talk about different entities being independent from each other. And my concern is communication among those. And if they're in their own silos, we're not having them work together. And so I don't think we can be as efficient as if we have interdepartmental communication
and work together. And that includes the police department to be involved in that interdepartmental discussion. So for me, when I see things like this one works independently, it concerns me about how are they going to integrate what they need to with the other departments to make sure that things work the way they need to. So what Roy was saying about interdepartmental involvement is, to me, very important. And I'd like to see us think about how our language looks in some of these documents, where we write things that say they'll be sort of working independently or isolated. And I know that independent, I know it may not mean that what I'm saying, right? But we have to just be careful with the language, or it will look like there's not going to be discussion among departments. And that's what we need. The only way we're going to make changes is if everybody's working in this together.
Great. Thank you, Shereen. And then Genevieve?
Thanks, Wydale. Yes, ditto, Shereen and Roy, and what Vidi said, but also one of the things that I think is, and this is a general statement, but I think it applies a lot to the advocacy piece as well. What is the intended outcome? So if we're asking for advocacy services, what does that actually mean? And how do you know advocacy has been achieved? And that's something that I don't think has been very clearly defined. In other words, have we, how do we know that the victim and their families have, received all of the information that they need, that they have, their requests have been met? Like, what are the metrics and the measurements that are needed to understand whether or not it has been effective? And for me, that's something that I've kind of looked for generally on all the recommendations is it complete, yes or no? I saw that you had the percentages in there, but also in practice, and I know this will likely come as implementation is made, but, and what does success for that look like? And the same should be said for the advocacy piece as well.
Okay, so hearing the outcome-based versus just having a program or a service. Okay, then I'm going to move over to Raquel.
So, hi everybody. This is a great conversation, and I just want to build on Genevieve's comments that I'm not only interested in seeing if it's been achieved and how do we know that, but I'm also interested in how are we understanding and measuring the impact, meaning how is a person's life different as a result of having that advocacy? How is a police officer's life different as a result of? I really want to see that as a result of, and I don't think that is going to be achieved by like a resident survey of satisfaction. It has to be much more intimate, and it also, I believe, requires an intersectional lens around all different facets of a person's life, because we know that people are not just a thing that they're experiencing, they're multiple things. So I'd be curious and also interested in helping figure that out.
Great. Thank you, Raquel. I know the staff are on the line, and I know that they'll probably take you up on that. So appreciate that invitation and clarification. And one last item in regards to Care 7 and social services is in regards to an element regarding increasing training. We've talked a little bit about increased funding and the element of independence from the police department, but I'm looking at an item here that talks about revamping education and training. Is there any specific examples that you would like to share to provide the team clarification on that? Okay. Great. We can always circle back to that, or if you think of something later, feel free to send that over to us. If you've seen an innovation that perhaps we may not be aware of, that would be wonderful. I'm going to move. Go ahead.
Was that a question to all of us?
Yes.
I thought you were asking a specific question to someone specific. I'm sorry. I actually do have a thought on that.
Okay.
And this is the implementation of crisis response teams, where if an officer is responding to a mental health call, domestic violence call, a child welfare call, that they are accompanied by a trained mental health expert, and maybe a paramedic. The crisis response team is usually comprised of a police officer, a mental health expert, social worker, and someone trained as a paramedic. So these types of teams help to resolve potential mental health crises. Because unfortunately, I believe the statistic is police officers are 16 times more likely to use physical force against someone experiencing a mental health crisis.
Okay, thank you, Roy. That clarification is helpful. And I'll move to Jacob, followed by Councilmember Kubi.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go off on that as well. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah, perfect. So in regards to crisis response, in our observation, especially what we're doing in Phoenix, we had noted that any involvement with the police has the opportunity to push an already precarious scenario over the edge. These sort of issues need to be responded by people who are certified in fields that pertain to behavioral health and crisis assistance and things of that nature, and not have any involvement from a first level engagement standpoint from, police culture. Even down to the standpoint of it's in a pillar like showing up with I know like kind of branches outside of behavioral health and whatnot, but in terms of like nonviolent crimes and things of that nature, because substance abuse can be considered a criminal act. The involvement of unarmed units, that's still placing involvement of police culture in areas in which they really are untrained and have the inability to be trained in these scenarios. So my personal concern is that this has the opportunity to lead to more issues of police brutality, misconduct, excessive force, etc. So when it comes to like CARE 7 and just the aspect of involvement in this specific subject matter, it's imperative that they show up first and foremost by themselves, and then have the opportunity to decide whether or not extra departmental assistance is needed. And also in terms of, weapons and things of that nature, I believe it's on the same section. Don't have it memorized, but chemical weapons and things of that nature, I do find that problematic as someone who has experienced the usage of, less than lethal chemical weapons and things of that nature due to like protests and legitimately nonviolent scenarios. So if you are leading from the standpoint of, I potentially have to use this weapon, rather than utilizing your years of expertise and, your background that you're certified in, then what is the purpose of showing up in the first place? And speaking with individuals who work on the ground level, it is like a social, it's a faux pas to show up with weapons or have use anything outside of their outside of like methods of like empathy and using reasoning in areas that they're certified in. So I definitely wanted to highlight that as well, since we're speaking on the subject.
Thank you. And we'll move to Lauren, please.
Yeah, you'd ask about training, if there are any other innovative trainings that we wanted to recommend. And I just wanted to ask more, just push it back into the training that we do have to ensure that all of our officers have that training. And I'm thinking specifically of CIT training. And I know La Frontera provides that for free. And we actually have the highest rate of pickup amongst officers of any East Valley city, but it's still, I think I could be wrong, Rob, so correct me. I think it's still 50%, which doesn't seem high to me, but it is high amongst the East Valley. So it seems to me that we need to have metrics about the percentage of our officers and, and staff and non-sworn officers, because, dispatch needs to be trained, obviously, to be able to recognize signals, right? So what percentage of our officers and staff have the CIT training? It's provided for free. It takes that time for the officers' shifts, but to know what percentage is really important, as well as the kinds of training we have.
Thank you. And we'll follow up with Rob, please.
I just wanted to say real quick, thanks, Councilmember Kubi, for bringing that up. And that's one thing that we pride ourselves on with crisis intervention team training, which is the gold standard of training. And we are actually We just started back, just for all your knowledge, our since COVID, we have a training going on right now. We have Tempe cops in CIT training, and that's going in through a collaboration with Phoenix. And we do have, it's well above 50% now, and we're striving to get, I mean, ultimately 100% of all of our officers CIT trained. And I agree with Jacob. These are things that need to be explored in terms of how do we divert calls that shouldn't be handled by law enforcement to behavioral health professionals. There is a $1 billion industry in community behavioral health in Maricopa County. And so let's leverage those resources, leverage those partnerships that we have. And we're exploring a partnership with an MOU through Crisis Response Network, now Solari, to embed a crisis dispatcher in our 911 dispatch to divert that call before it even gets to a police officer, if it's appropriate. So these are things that need to be forward thinking and really move on. And so let's really embrace that and explore those partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We have about 6 more questions. I do want to get some clarifying information regarding creating transparent and open data governance, specifically around publishing data in real time. The question is, what specific data are you looking for in regards to when we are creating our public-facing dashboard? What additional information would you like shared on that? Genevieve.
You sound so surprised, Wydale.
Oh,
so,
no.
Yeah, so I'm going to be as bold as to say all of it. So if and I don't mean to be trite by that at all, right? But the reality is data builds trust. Reliable data builds trust. Timely data builds trust and transparency, right? So if you think about all of these initiatives, if you think about demographics, stops, what people are being pulled over for, what the demographics are, was a mental health professional needed, was there an outcome from the officers, that is all information that should be able to be gathered. And I recognize the significant data infrastructure that's needed for this, Mark. I'm sure you're wincing at this, but you know, I understand that you're moving towards a paperless, a digital ticketing system, right? You're evolving for this. Those data fields that would be in a ticket that's issued to someone should be available on a dashboard of some kind. And when you establish those outcome measurements that you're going for, whether it's departmental goals, whether they're overall public safety goals, anything from the dashboards you're already doing around wastewater to, you know, the number of human services dollars and where they're going, like all of that can and should be available in some kind of dashboard system. I will say it wouldn't be just, it would be lovely if you could get all of that in one snapshot, but it's a lot of data. Mm-hmm. And so and the governance piece of that's going to be really critical as well. So having an oversight that should be, in my opinion, should be not a public safety thing. That should not be a police department standard. It should be a citywide standard and reviewed as far as how quickly that data needs to be pulled if there's a public records request, right? How are what do definitions of certain words mean if you're talking about dispatch? Like all those definitions need to be rationalized and harmonized before it can be put into a dashboard of some kind. So I would say a good starting point would be, as you're developing and implementing these recommendations, you know, those outcome measurements are a good first step, in addition to whatever the departmental goals and objectives are.
Thank you, Genevieve. Appreciate that.
Just for clarification, yeah, just for clarification, and Mark, I'm sure wanted to say this, but about 5 years ago, we created the open governance group that is separate. I hate to say independent because I know now that word, it might be seen as working in silos, but it is interdepartmental and it has its own policies. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I knew you were going to say all of it, Genevieve. It was just kind of a hunch.
I'm glad you said that, Rosa. I actually co-chair that with Dr. Stephanie Dietrich. And one of the things that we do train our employees on, and again, it's an iterative process, is that by default, our data is open and accessible. There will be exceptions, obviously, but that's kind of the stance, the tone that the open governance and the open data policy takes. So it's a building block for us. So thank you for that, Genevieve. I'm going to move from metrics to engagement, and this is in regards to creating community connections and representation.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lauren. Go ahead, please.
But yeah, it's about the data. When Genevieve mentioned tickets, it brought to mind, it seemed like a very strong recommendation that came out of the group was to, that it was important to keep not just tickets, not just citations, but keep information, demographic information on stops. That stops are equally important because that's where, that's where harassment could happen. So is that part of our data collection as we are planning?
Mark or Jeff, do you want to chime in real quickly? We have been having these conversations, trying to get a data inventory of our police department. There were some national best practices recommending 5, to what Genevieve said about 5 data points that every department nationally should be putting out. Stop and frisk is one of them. So to Genevieve's point, we have been looking at what the data point. What needs to happen is our open data inventory of the police department, and they have been working with us. It's a huge lift. It's an infrastructure if you think about the largest department. So yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll move to Michael.
I just want to say I put a link in the chat. I remember when we were looking at data in the beginning, a lot of us were concerned that the data points that were being collected weren't actually reflective of, weren't measurements that would allow us to understand how white supremacy impacted policing, how, how deeply racism was embedded in terms of outcomes like stops, right? And this is just something I did a quick Google search. Policingequity.org has some really interesting things on there, including reports on confronting white supremacy and doing data collection around that within police departments, specific reporting on stops and equity. It looks like a good resource. I have not read all of it yet, but it looks like maybe an interesting place to start that could help with data collection categories and doing that in an equitable way.
Great, thank you. So in regards to creating community connections and representation, there is a question around the recommendation of engaging communities most impacted by policies and practices in defining safety. The clarification question is, who should define safety and how will it be defined? And specifically, the communities most impacted. What communities are we referring to in that recommendation?
And Wydell,
Sure.
Keisha says she's having connection issues. They're traveling, so they're on their phone.
Okay.
She did have a question regarding this, so we'll have to watch to see if they jump back on. She asked.
If
when it
not,
gets-
I'll make a note to follow back up so that we hear some clarification there.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, we're actually here right now on
good.
by phone.
Thank you, Keisha.
Perfect.
Yeah, so just a quick clarification in the community engagement pillar. So I wanted to just first and foremost say, so far I have appreciated the effort that has gone into and the forethought that has gone into adopting a lot of the things that we've discussed throughout the task force. But one thing that I wanted to clarify, it does say in there that the city will be reaching out to work with local orgs such as BLM and the NAACP to help with recruiting police officers. And I just wanted to clarify that that is outside of our scope of work and not something that we will be participating in. Will not be participating in.
Oh, will not. Okay, thank you. It was cutting in a little bit out there. So you were saying that not BLM will not be participating in that, so we can modify that document. I think it was just examples of stakeholder groups that might. So thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, so our next question is regarding educating students on the role of police. How can we get youth involved in this education? So if you have some suggestions, we would be happy for you to include those in chat. I know that Rosa mentioned earlier one of her projects and programs that she will have oversight on is in regards to vaccinations. And we were talking about that just today and yesterday about how do we get youth involved in that. So your suggestions would be helpful. If you could drop those into chat, since they might be specific suggestions, that would be helpful to us. And then another question is in regards to expanding our collaboration with community partners. And I'm going to back up. Janae, I think I missed your hand. I apologize. Okay, we'll keep moving forward and raise your hand again if you would like. So the next question. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Janae.
No, I'm so sorry. It ended up going in and out from mute. I just think to give a little bit of context, it would be important for the people on the task force to know with regard to diversity and recruiting that through the diversity office, we are doing a fulsome review of national, regional, and local best practices for how to increase diversity in our recruiting, promotion, retention policies for the city of Tempe completely within all departments. So certainly working with the police department, fire department, our front facing, especially our community centers as well, is going to be important, and we're working on that. Thanks, Wydell.
Thank you, Janae. Appreciate that. So collaboration again with community partners. This question is in regards to the element of leveraging community expertise to provide services and invest in data tracking. Not all services have to be city provided. Are there specific nonprofit partners in mind regarding this recommendation?
Wydell, can you point to where that is in the document?
It's under expanding our collaboration with community partners. And it is item A. Leverage community expertise and ability to provide services and invest in data tracking. So it's really about collaborating with the community, perhaps nonprofits is one of the items of the question, to leverage data and data sharing.
If I may add, I believe that I know for a fact that the NAACP will continue our relationship with the city in this regard. And I would also like to recommend that the city of Tempe reconnect with the Urban League Young Professionals to build a relationship as well, because I believe that they would be more than willing to lend some expertise from the youth, or not youth, but the younger professional perspective. After I reached 40, I was told that I could no longer be considered a young professional. So
sorry, Roy.
yeah, I was kicked out. But no, I will say that, that I would definitely reach out, suggest that they be contacted.
Okay, thank you, Roy. And I'll move to both Genevieve and then followed by Shireen, please.
Yeah, so I have to admit, I don't recall the specific discussion around that question. However, I have to mention, we have great relationships with nonprofits throughout the city, particularly through Tempe Community Council and some of our nonprofit partners that we're funding there that provide anything from, services to people in crisis, right? So food boxes or rental assistance or any number of advocacy services for individuals with disabilities or domestic violence survivors. So part of that agency review process to determine the funds that are provided to those nonprofit partners. And there's always more need than there are funds to give. But, part of that application process is data gathering, right? We're asking how many Tempeans are you serving? What's their demographic breakdown? What is the, if you don't receive all the funds, which is kind of the history of how that goes. Again, more need than there are dollars to give. What services can you provide with reduced funds? And so, that's one place, just from my experience, where I know there's a ton of data, and there's even more, that community needs assessment is going on right now. I thought I saw Octavia join the call, and I don't know if she wants to jump in on any of that, but there's definitely a lot of nonprofit partners that are already doing good outreach work in the city, and providing anything from healthcare to emergency food services.
Thank you. We'll jump to Shireen, and then Octavia has her hand up as well then.
Well, I'm going to echo what Genevieve said, but I do remember us talking about how we could involve our partners and not just be a city run and focus on that, because we have a lot of great partners that are out there that are doing really good work. And it seems like very often we just say, what can we do as a city, without saying, how can we partner and not have to hire more city staff and not have to focus on it within our city. But create, again, that goes back to those partnerships that we're talking about and having people work together. So I'm a big proponent in us doing more with partners than less, and seeing what we can do. So I would love to see us take this and run with it and work with our partners about what can we be doing together, and how can we use those partners in ways that can help us fulfill some of these recommendations. Instead of saying that we have to build it from the inside, let's bring in folks from the outside who can offer some of those services.
Great. Thank you. And then I'll move to Octavia.
Thanks, Maydell. So for me, I do appreciate Roy's feedback around the Urban League Young Professionals. I'm familiar with them, Roy, although I did not put myself out there to be rejected upon reaching 40. But it is a group that I have had some casual acquaintance with. And so this will provide me an opportunity to go back and talk with them again. And then you talked about the NAACP, and I know that there are youth, NAACP youth, that there's a special group within the NAACP. So we'll definitely reach out to them as well, because my division, when I'm Deputy Human Services Director, is Community Partnerships and Resources. And so always glad to be aware of and be knowledgeable of, and also become more collaborative with those additional organizations. And then thank you for providing the clarity around what was meant by involving more community partners. And if there were things that you were thinking about around data tracking, if there's things that we may not be tracking already, I would want to ensure that we get that feedback so that we have that understanding of what we need to do more of, and what's useful from what we're currently doing. So that's what I wanted to add to that. And Genevieve is definitely correct. There are about 50 to 60 agency partners who are providing services in the community. They're nonprofits, but we know that we don't have all of our needs provided, and there's not always enough funding that goes around, but we do try to partner where we can. And if there's more partners out there that we're not aware of, we definitely want to be in touch with them and coordinating services with them as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question that ties into one of the clarification questions as well, and it's in regards to recruiting and developing an inclusive, engaged workforce, but if thinking a clarification in regards to rethinking roles and jobs of police. But before we move to that, I'd like to see if we can address a question that came in from Lauren Kuby in the chat in regards to SROs and schools and the status. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Miss Wood has her hand up also.
I'm so sorry. I switched to a different view to get that question, so I apologize. Miss Wood first.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great discussion, great suggestions. I wanted to add to the conversation about leveraging expertise in our community. Roy, I want to piggyback on the young professionals, but I also wanted to add the fraternities and the sororities. You got ASU sitting there. You have the Panhellenic, the Black Greek, you have all the different Greek organizations. They do a lot of work in the community. They're very connected to our young people. And Roy, yes, you did graduate from youth. And but they are they're the young adults. They're in their 20s and they are actually on the ground. They're the ones that have these interactions with the Tempe police officers more than anyone else would be the fraternities and sororities, just based on party and all the other stuff that they do. I do believe we need to partner with them and work with them and make sure that they are being able to have an opportunity to give feedback and their expertise in their areas of being a student here in the Tempe community. So I believe we definitely need to reach out to them, and they're organized and they have their liaisons in place. So wanted to lend them that information because we definitely need to reach out to all of them. And they also have grad chapters as well that work in the community and do a lot of community service. So and a lot of expertise in each and every one of those sororities and fraternities that we can definitely tap into.
Thank you. And Jacob, please.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to the community engagement pillar. Just really focus on that if y'all don't mind. I had a question that I posed in the chat, and I just wanted to know the purpose of, say, launching a plan to build relationships between the community and line level officers. Just engaging with vulnerable populations to create a diverse and engaged community. Just things of that nature. I feel that if we're going to attempt to, paint police culture and, just the history of police involvement in impacted communities in a better light, I think that removing these forced interactions when they are currently and historically been a source of trauma, that's the proper step. The reason why we're here is to address accountability. And it's like we're putting the cart before the horse in terms of some of these solutions in the community engagement pillar. I just felt a little perturbed reading that, to be completely honest. I do feel that, something like F, I honestly feel like that should have been A, and avoiding minor citations such as violations and et cetera. We've all read that, but that should have been focused. But I see all these opportunities to spend resources and time on engaging with the community to prove or show that, they're not this hostile force and that these real, true, traumatic experiences do not exist or are not as prevalent as what we have or we're making it out to be, which is very much a fact. This is why we're having these conversations. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to find an understanding and reasoning behind why these are some solutions that are planned for this particular pillar, as opposed to addressing accountability and doing what we need to do in order to, avoid issues of police brutality and everything that we've been speaking about for the past 7 or so months. Yeah, there's something else I was going to say, but I'll just type it into chat. I forgot. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And Alana has her hand up.
Thanks, Modell. Yeah, I appreciate Jacob's points of view and the experiences that have been had. I would really like to hear from our police department on their view and RSOs being in the schools and their perspective on that issue.
Yeah, so I can answer to that question. You can do both. So we can acknowledge that there's been trauma and there's been some issues that have happened in policing, as we all know and we're all aware. But you also have to build relationships and engage with the population, with the community. We are a part of the community. The community has a say in exactly how we interact and what we do. It's important that we acknowledge these issues, but it's also important that we still try and stay engaged with the community to be able to bridge those gaps. That's how we learn. We learn from each other, and we learn from those mistakes that are made. and that's how we move forward together. As far as SROs, I can say there's been countless times where we have seen in Tempe where the SROs have actually saved students' lives, where students were suicidal. In fact, I want to say it was either last year or 2019, we had an SRO that was honored for a life-saving award because he was able to save a student who was in an act of trying to commit suicide. So there's important work that's being done. They're not only there to be there as public safety on campus, they're there to actually teach. They actually are required to teach students for over 180 hours while they're there. They're there to be able to engage them, to be able to teach them, to be able to allow for them to understand, rule of law, procedure, knowing your rights. There's other things that is involved in it. They're not there to just solely be there to enact as an enforcement measure. So in other places, I have heard a lot of horror stories, but I haven't heard that in terms of what our interaction from our school resource officers and what they do and how they engage in Tempe. Again, there's always going to be opportunities where we do better, but for the most part, we don't deal in the same type of issues that we have seen maybe in the other parts of the valley. Our school resource officers have done a very good job. And that's why we still have them in the schools, is because the superintendents and many of the parents and many community members have found them to be very valuable in that role.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that perspective.
Could I just add on just to one point of that?
Is this Keisha? Okay.
I think I think it's important to basically contextualize the issue with SRIs. I think that it's while I'm sure there are good SRO officers, I think it's important not to just look at like singular case studies and look at it more from an institutional perspective. Now, when we look at it from an institutional perspective, we see that SROs are put in schools that have a higher percentage of Black and Brown students. We don't have SROs in the rich white schools. And that proximity to police puts Black and Brown students at a higher risk of the school to prison pipeline. So instead of having a school counselor or a security guard who doesn't have a badge, who isn't an actual police officer, when a student gets in trouble, even things like maybe bringing drugs to school, it's the difference between being, put into the police system and getting reprimanded from a security officer. That proximity to police, which Black and Brown students have a higher percentage of across the board, increases the school to prison pipeline. So SROs institutionally are putting Black and Brown students into essentially prisons over the long term. And so while I'm sure individual officers may, be nice and they may save lives, we have to look at it from an institutional perspective. SROs put Black and Brown students at a higher risk, and it increases inequities because we're not seeing SROs in the rich white schools.
I'd like to have the chief and then followed by Genevieve, please.
Just to make a correction on the statement that Keisha just made regarding the SROs and not being in affluent schools. They are in affluent schools in the city of Tempe. That's primarily where they are at in the city of Tempe. I would say that we would probably want to look at the numbers for the city of Tempe as it relates to the interactions and who they are actually stopping and or arresting before we would want to make a leap to that assumption. But I understand exactly what she's saying, because there are in different places where you definitely have seen that, and I fully acknowledge that. So I want to look at the data as well.
Thank you. We'll move to Genevieve, followed by Michael, and then Viri. Sorry.
So I think what we're getting at here in this particular conversation is that fundamental question of what is the role of policing in our community. And by that, I mean, should a police officer, an SRO, who has, from what I understand, additional training to be able to interact with youth in this, positive and coaching kind of way, should they be the ones to teach about rights and awareness of policies and procedures? Or should that be something that is taken on by victim advocacy services so they understand it from that perspective? Should that engagement be done directly with police? Because this is what the SROs are, correct me if I'm wrong, but primarily funded by the school districts. That is line items that could be used for teachers, and it's budget out of the school district's budget, a good chunk of it that goes to SROs. They're paid for. I'm looking at Chief Glover's face here. He's correcting me. I can already see it. But I believe the school district does pay something to have the SROs on their campuses. And so that's kind of, I think, what we've been dancing around on a number of subjects is what is the function of policing supposed to be? Are they supposed to be community outreach, or are they supposed to be responding to emergencies? Are they supposed to be engaging and providing a positive role model and trying to win hearts and minds, or are they meant to be acting in that response capacity to a specific incident that's happening? Because it sounds like, if SROs are in fact, and I have heard these stories as well, or not, they're not stories, these facts where they have prevented and de-escalated mental health situations. But is that supposed to be something that they handle, or is that supposed to be something that a social worker or a counselor might be better able to provide the social, emotional health and wellness of the students, as opposed to an officer providing that?
Thank you, Genevieve. We'll move to Viri and then back to Jeff. We do have 2 more questions we'd like to get to before we have to conclude for the evening. So Viri, or Michael first and then Viri.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. I just wanted to, I put a bunch of links in the chat. SROs have been in schools for over 6 decades. This is very well studied, and very objective organizations from Harvard to the Brookings Institute have come to the conclusion that SROs do not make schools safer. You can look at from very conservative organizations to very liberal organizations. The data overwhelmingly shows that SROs actually don't make schools a safer place. So just the objective data, and those are the trends. I wanted to share that. I've put the links in there. I can share many more studies if you'd like, but I'm happy to be a resource in that sense because I'm a data nerd. But overall, that is the top finding that you'll find from liberal to conservative think tanks and policy based groups and organizations that look at this. The SROs overall are not making our schools safer, and are increasing things like racial injustice on campuses.
Okay, we'll move to Viri. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Genevieve, for that. I guess the only things I was going to add, because y'all covered a lot, was, in Phoenix Union right now, that SROs were removed in this last year. Students are going through a participatory budget because there was around $1.2 million from the school's money allocated to police, additional to the state grants. And so that has now freed up $1.2 million that students are creating and submitting ideas around what would bring safety to them, because police were not it. But I think also there's a few.
I'm sorry, I think we've lost Viri.
Oh, wait.
There you go.
Okay. That there is mandatory reporting law in the state that requires, according to that, police to be called under certain circumstances. And so there's like a list of, I think, of 10 items. So most of the schools that, have to call the police under this list of 10 things, which is how SRO, how they also talk about SROs being in the schools. So I think that is another area around, like, how can we advocate for that list to not exist and not reduce and not criminalize youth for, I think they have, like, I think Sarah mentioned, like, drugs, like weed, in that list, right? Like, having that is a mandatory reporting. Not every school does it, but the schools that want to will do that. And then I think another point of advocacy is immigration, right? It happened in 2012, but there was a case of a school, students getting in a fight, students being arrested, and in that arrest, one deportation proceedings happened, right? So students getting in a fight shouldn't, if I got in fights in school, unfortunately, and like needed other things, but in that, like, that shouldn't lead to a deportation. And so I think that those are two other advocacy areas that I will put in, is like MCSO still working with ICE, and any youth getting in contact with those agencies puts people also in risk of deportation, which has been a lot of the stories we've heard from youth at Phoenix Union as well. So,
okay. Thank you, Viri. With that, I'd like to, I do know that it sounds like there's needs to be a little bit of a deeper dive into the SROs. I know that we will make note of that in regards to implementation, and that, so I appreciate everyone's clarification and your comments in regards to that. A couple more questions. I think it's actually our final question is in regards to item modernizing discipline and accountability and creating a better process so there are no loopholes to avoid accountability. Ensure there is a resultant action taken when officers are reprimanded through an independent office of investigation. There's clarification requested regarding the disciplinary process, and is this referring to the current police accountability measures and policies? So if there's any clarification that this group can provide, we'd appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you. Want to appreciate or share my appreciation and the department's appreciation. I'm sorry?
I was late.
Oh, Roy,
I wanted to reiterate the initial points that I made around the officers. How can we address, and maybe we can we have a quick conversation? How can we address the officers' conduct in the community, like the use of profanity, just a consistent record of complaints or abuse against the community? How can we address it? If we are observing an officer who's having a consistent amount of complaints, and hopefully maybe Chief Pooley or Chief Glover can answer that.
Chief Glover or Assistant Chief Pooley?
I'm sorry, Roy. I had a little bit of noise in my background and I couldn't hear everything you just said. If you could repeat it for me, and I'm sorry that you have to go through that again.
No problem. I'll keep repeating it. But how can we address internally officers' conduct, such as the use of profanity, when conducting police business in the community, and also if you see an established string of complaints against a specific officer, what course of action can you take to remove that officer from the streets?
So I would say that for the pertaining to the language and behavior or conduct of officers, we have policies that does dictate if it's something is reported in relations to what that officer is doing in terms of his language or behavior, and it's actually something that is against our policy. Obviously, we have some strong policies as it relates to that. The body-worn camera and the fact that we have high utilization rates allows for us to go back and check and be able to do those types of checks in terms of just looking at what is being done, what is the behavior, what kind of actions has this officer demonstrated. It also allows us an opportunity to go back, and if we have to go back and do reviews on a particular officer, because we see something either that is just unconscionable or something that that looks like there may be a pattern, we can go back and we can do a check of that officer's history, looking at body-worn camera and their interactions and how they actually interact with the public in general, and sort of seeing exactly if there is some type of a trend, as well as any type of complaints that come in, whether it goes to our internal affairs or whether it's in the chain of command. All of that is captured by what we have is called a blue team data entry, and so that information is there for us to be able to take a look at, to be able to go back over it. And if we are seeing a trend, we can pull that person off the street. Now, what we would love to be able to do, and we've had these conversations, myself and Rosa and Mark, is being able to have all of this data that is interconnected, where we have it all speaking to one another, and we can create those dashboards that's public facing, so you can see exactly what is happening out there. And we can see on the back end where we are able to look at early warning intervention before something gets out of hand or escalates with an officer. That is, now, we're seeing some conduct or some behaviors that seem to be completely out of character, and it's going in a direction that we don't want to see it. We can pull that officer off the street right away. And so that's a part of what we've been working on.
Thank you, Chief. With that, I have one last comment from Janelle, and then we'll move forward to the next part of our agenda. Janelle, please.
Yeah, just real quick, I want to piggyback on that before we go off of that. And Chief Glover, thank you for that explanation. One of the things that I have seen and keep hearing, because Roy knows I am a stickler for professionalism, and I've been talking about our officers being professional when they engage with all of our communities. But in particular, we've noticed the profanity and the vulgarities that come and obscenities come our way. So a question I have, while there may be a policy in place that states that they cannot use profanity or obscenities or whatever that policy is, what I'm seeing is a practice. There's a difference between policy and practice and what's being allowed. Now, my question to you, Chief Glover, is what is the rubric that you all go through all the time versus having a complaint? But this officers is always being, we're reviewing for how they're interacting with the community, especially if they're in the community. What is that check-in? How often are we checking in on that stuff? How often is that being reviewed, and who's responsible for that? And when do we catch these trends? Do we catch them after a complaint, or are we dealing with it before we get there? I'm talking about being proactive. So what are we doing proactively so we don't even have to experience any of these traumas and have this going on? What are we doing?
The proactive piece, and I know that Mike Pooley has raised his hand, and I'll let him jump in on some of this, but part of the proactive piece is really, it's part of the culture of making sure the supervisors are staying engaged with the officer and making sure that they're monitoring what their officer's interaction is. That is probably one of the most important duties and functions of a line level supervisor. That sergeant should be monitoring for what activity his officer is doing out in the field and knowing exactly how they're interacting. And in terms of disciplinary wise, when they do look at let's say body worn camera, or they're doing a review on that officer as it is related to professionalism, there's a process to that. If they see something that's out of line, they're going to bring them in and talk to them. From there, it may raise to a level of oral reprimand. It could go up to a written reprimand if this is something that we see, repeatedly. But then at that point, if it's something that is again, where this person is completely getting, out of line, it should be the expectation or the culture that we're trying to build is that sergeant should be able to pull that officer off the street and be able to have a conversation with the chain of command to say, hey, I have a problem. There's an issue with this particular person, and we need to do a little bit more with him or her to figure out exactly what is going on, because there could be something underlying going on that we don't know about, and that calls for us to actually have to do that.
Thank you, Chief. Again, I want to just move to our next section, but first I wanted to just thank you and share our appreciation for the insights that you've provided as we move towards our next steps with your recommendations and integrating them with other items and initiatives that Rosa mentioned before. I do want to remind you that we did send you an email that we wanted to share from Dr. Robbie Adler-Tapia. So please do know that all of the task force members have received that as well. So again, my thanks. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rosa in regards to our next steps.
Thank you, Wydell. I just wanted to, looking at that, we have about 12 minutes, checking in with everyone, because some of the next steps is discussing this with the council. And we've talked about that from the beginning. So that preliminary meeting is going to be held on June 17th. So we have a placeholder to share this plan with the council. And incidentally, we also have the same day we are meeting with the multi-departmental team that we've assembled, that we've already met once before a month ago, as we started to look at this plan and assign owners and timelines, but we're getting right to work. So I wanted to make sure that check in with everyone, obviously, and see if there's any questions, final questions, concerns, anything that we need to know about.
Rosa, I had a question.
Is that Alana?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I had a question really on the process here, given that there's a lot in here. Wondering what the process is with the council and with just legal in general on what in here is actually implementable and legal, because there's a lot of great ideas in here, but not sure some of these things in here could be legally implementable. And then secondarily, there may be things in here that, may not be unanimous in nature from the task force members. I, for one, especially am very concerned about language in here about suspending hiring police officers or, pausing anything. As a resident, I think we need to have that process in, continuing. So just want to kind of put those points out, because I would like to know how internally leadership is going to handle those questions.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you for that question and for being honest as far as perhaps some of the items that you have questions or concerns about. So the interdepartmental team was carefully identified to include, obviously, Judy Bauman, Human Services, we have Police Department, obviously, Community Services. So it's a very large team. And not to ignore the fact that the process has just started and it needs to stay fluid. There might be things that we assign along the way, Alana, that we realize, oh, someone else is missing from this table. I can tell you in the last day, I've added our fire chief, Care 7, and Judy Bauman specifically. So we have the people who probably need to look at this plan initially, and to your point, make recommendations from their legal perspective, especially Judy, as far as what is executable, like what can we really take action on, or what do we need to have further conversations. The idea also that I want to share with all of you is to have status updates with all of you, and we need to decide on what cadence that should be. So when we think about perhaps whether it's twice a year, checking in with you, or even more than that, but as you recall also, status updates should take place transparently with the public. So June 17th, to answer directly your question, June 17th, it goes to the Council of the Whole for presentation. Jeff and I are intending to present this and to talk about the entire community safety plan that involves a lot more than, honestly, than these recommendations. It involves the other aspects that I shared with you earlier today for feedback. And then obviously that goes to the public as it is today. This is being televised. So then the public is able to weigh in also. One important part that was shared earlier today that is imperative is working with our nonprofits. Shireen has shared that. Our community partners are very important in this work. We cannot do this alone. And to Roy's comment earlier, this is not just about me steering this. This is about our city working together. And once again, it's not independent, it's autonomous departments, but accountable to one another, and most importantly, accountable to this community about what we're setting out to do. So Alana, I'm happy to go to the council and share that perhaps your items are not you specifically, but that there has been some hesitation on the hiring of the officers for further conversations. Once again, these are recommendations for further exploration. I hope that helps, Alana.
Yeah, a little bit, but I'm definitely going to be interested in seeing where those go.
Thank you.
We do have one hand raised from Councilmember Kuby as you continue with next steps, Rosa. So Councilmember Kuby.
Yes, just for the June 17th meeting, should we inform everyone on the task force about how to participate in that meeting if they want to give public comment or testimony before the presentation? Because with COVID, it's a little different engaging with the council in our virtual setup.
Absolutely. We'd be happy to share that in an email, separate email, if it is what we decide to do is move forward with that. Once again, it's a placeholder for the June 17th meeting. I also wanted to add, Alana, I hear you as far as the gaps in service for our community. We have just started looking at how do we implement. You heard Rob talk about things that we need to explore. We need to have subject matter experts. You see that on your agenda. One example I wanted to share with you is through our work with Bloomberg Foundation, they have created a cohort, and Jacob will be happy to hear about this, nationally looking at cities who apply, hopefully will be selected, to enter a cohort of looking at reinventing or reimagining what 911 looks like in cities. So that's what I mean as far as other subject matter experts to help advise, but that does not negate the fact that we have subject matter experts in our own community from ASU fraternities and sororities and nonprofits. So it is a balance of all of that. I have asked, Andrew and I have had this conversation, and he can share if he'd like, or if you all want to leave in about 5 minutes. We are in the process of looking at all this, discovering, imagining, innovating, leveraging technology to better serve and to build trust. So when we think about that, it is very hard to discontinue providing the service that we have, that our officers are providing, perhaps seizing any of that, until we understand collectively what direction we're heading in. So I commit to all of you, obviously, we cannot not hire officers right now. We need to continue the service. There shouldn't be a gap in service right now, but we commit to exploring these things and recognizing that eventually we have to understand what is this new department, what are some of the services that are going to be shifted to Human Services or Care 7, if that is what we all decide to do. And if it does, then the new staffing model needs to be identified. And Andrew and I have shared that will take place later, obviously, once we understand what the functions will be for the departments. And then that staffing model, as always, would be transparent, but that would probably be contracted out for a third party to review those staffing models. Any questions on that? I hope that helps also.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and then the final piece with that, it is going to turn it over to our chief and Rob to talk about. I opened up the session by talking about the relationships we have started here in October, thanks to our mayor assembling this team. But we need to continue. I always say relationships need to be nurtured. We need to have opportunities to continue communication and collaboration. And the chief would like to, and Rob would like to extend an invitation to all of you about some work that they're doing. Thanks, Chief.
Yes, thank you, Rosa. So some of the things that we are currently doing, and we have had conversations in some of the past subsequent meetings as it relates to our de-escalation program. And in the fall, we're going to be running our advanced officer training. And so those that are interested, we would definitely, want you to come in and be able to take a look at and view exactly how the officers are being trained. So that way you can get a firsthand seat as to what takes place when officers are actually going through this kind of training, what the classroom looks like, what does it look like for them to go through, use of force and de-escalation. Additionally, we've been beta testing new technology to see exactly what we can do in terms of being able to utilize less force, the least amount of force is necessary. And we've been working with RAP Technologies on some equipment that they've been able to provide to us to beta test. We actually went in and did some demoing. The mayor was a part of that, as well as Andrew Ching, the city manager and deputy city manager in Chowsty. And so for those that are interested in taking part in that, we can coordinate for a group to go out and see exactly what type of technology is actually out there for police departments to utilize that lend itself to using the least amount of force possible and to be able to effect an arrest. And so we want to just be able to put that out there to all of you to get your input, because quite honestly it would be good to have at least some feedback from you all on whether that technology is something that you agree with or something that you see as a potential issue. And so we welcome the input, and we wanted to make sure that was put out there. I know that Rob is going to hit on a few items, so I'll let him jump in.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Rosa, for the opportunity to speak. I'll be brief. There's 340 stories on the Tempe Police Department about why we serve. I told you in the beginning. I told you my 9/11 World Trade Center related story, but all of us have a reason that led us to this career choice. I pride myself on relationships, with the TOA. I've worked with the mayor, Councilmember Kuby, Councilmember Keating, and others. We haven't always agreed. But through it all, we've always agreed on our mutual respect for each other and our collaborative spirit to improve Tempe. I believe firmly that life should always be about challenging yourself. While there have been times that I have been uncomfortable during this process of listening and digesting of what was being said, I've always been open to growing and learning. I hope that all of you are open to that as well. With that, while we might not always agree, I renew my offer from last year to meet and discuss and learn from each other. And so I appreciate the opportunity. I wish us all well moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Rob. And I think that brings us to the end. Mayor, we will turn it over to you. You assembled us. You get to close this meeting out.
No, thank you, Rosa. Once again, thank you so much for quarterbacking this entire process, and Wydell for your expertise in running the entire group and kind of facilitating the chat and making sure to call on people, and Jonay for all the work that you've done as well during this process. The team did an exceptional job of facilitating these meetings. I also wanted to say too, thank you to Sergeant Ferraro for being at all of these meetings. One of the things, I had a number of offline discussions with people during the course of the task force, and one of the things they remarked about on a regular basis was there are other people who are heading, officer unions or police associations that there's no access to whatsoever. And the comment I heard regularly about Sergeant Ferraro was just the how impressed people were with his willingness to be at all of these meetings and sit there. And as he said, some of the things sometimes are a little bit uncomfortable and sometimes a little difficult to digest, but he still continued to show up at each and every meeting and participate in this process and really come to the table. And I was always so impressed that people always said, there are other people we can't, in other cities that we try to work with, we simply don't have the interactions with them, and they frankly won't engage with us. So the fact that he's consistently been here and has continued to offer, his hand out to say if people do want to sit down and talk more and learn more and collaborate, that opportunity remains. And so I just wanted to say thank you to Sergeant Ferraro for all his participation, and also to Chief Glover. Just really quickly as well. I mean, as someone who I've known for 13 years, someone who's our police chief, but someone who I consider to be a very close friend, someone who I know, retired back in February of 2020, and then was retired for a few short months, and then came back, and I believe started 2 days before the first task force meeting, and immediately jumped right in with both feet, and also has been here at each and every meeting. And just doing an exceptional job with our officers, working with the community. Many times I know there were some situations where he called members of the task force to talk about certain things that were going on either with the task force or within the police department. And people would say, at first I saw him calling and I was wondering, and I almost didn't want to answer the phone because I'm like, what did I do? But the fact is, that's just frankly how the chief is. He's very much about outreach and with making sure to really take good care of the men and women of the Tempe Police Department, but also really having a heart for the community and wanting to make sure that outreach is there. And my internal joke with him always is that you would think as the mayor, I might know a ton of people, but frankly, he knows 10 times the people that I'll probably ever know. So I just wanted to thank the chief, for everything and for being here, and obviously for jumping in immediately as soon as you started as chief, and for all of your hard work. I mean, I've got I know that myself and the members of this council have full faith and confidence in you and your ability to continue to lead the department and to continue to work with our community. So I just wanted to say a very personal, heartfelt thank you. And last thing, just to everyone else, I mean, to all the members who participated in this task force, as I said before, you gave hours and hours, I'm sure probably at this point, 25 to 30 hours of your volunteer personal time that you could have been doing a whole lot of things, but you came forward in this process to talk with us, to share your honest, sort of straightforward ideas, and to really just sort of engage in a community dialogue. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. I'm excited about this, hopefully coming to the council next Thursday, June 17th for discussion with the entire group, and just looking forward to continuing to talk with you offline. Just because the task force, this portion is ending does not mean, as everyone kind of reiterated before me, Chief Glover, Sergeant Ferraro, Rosa, we are going to continue to foster and nurture these relationships. So please feel free if there are questions, or as the chief talked about, trainings or things that you need or information that you want from Sergeant Ferraro, please continue to reach out to us, even if we aren't formally meeting. We're all public servants, and we're absolutely available to you for whatever information you might need or for whatever conversations you might like to have. So with that said, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. Thank you, City Manager Andrew Ching. Rosa, for leading some dynamic meetings. And just thank you for everything. You all have a wonderful evening. I look forward to seeing you all very soon.
Thank you, Mayor Woods. We appreciate you. This is a rare event right here. This doesn't happen across the country. I hope that this gets more publicity. So.
Thank you, Roy. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll definitely put it out to our NAACP membership that this has happened, and they'll be able to follow along, and hopefully they'll be able to participate. We'll be able to participate and follow the council meeting as well. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Go Suns!
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Bye.
Thank you.